Hello. That was so cute. Do we get that? Do we get that in frame? What's up, beautiful jellyfish? It's Tracy. I just really hope, like, there are some people out there who are, like, such aesthetic vibe YouTubers, like, look, everything is so prim and proper and perfect, and then I'm over here, like, cats, man. Like, this is the life. If you have cats, like, you understand. There's also Leia. Do you see her sleeping in the background on her cat tower? I moved the cat tower, and ever since I moved it, she's just, like, rediscovery. Like, this is my new favorite thing. I was like, bro, I literally moved it from one room, one place in my office to another. And this is Zelda, who's living her literal best life right now. She just needs to settle and figure out her life. I mean, like, honestly, girls theme. In this video, I have basically taken every single one of my deck building tips. This is so distracting. You need to stop. Love her, but, like, also, like, this is unhinged. Okay. I am taking every single deck building tip and I am combining it into one singular video. For the first part of this video, and then I'm going to swing it all back around, is we are going to be starting out this video and kind of, like, you're a new Magic player and you're figuring out, okay, like, where do you start? What are you doing? What are some, like, things to do, right? Okay, and so basically, here's my thought process is, like, you're starting out as a commander player. What are you doing? Well, first off, before we do that, I'm Tracy. I've been building decks for truly years on end. I have been playing Magic for over 10 years. That was my political campaign. That's why you should support me. That's why you can trust me with your deck building tips. I've done this before. I've done this quite a few times. And I have cats. I mean, truly, where else could you find that? You could probably find that a lot of places. Okay, that was a bad example. But here was my thought is you're starting out deck building. Where should you start? There's so many avenues and there's so many, like, that's something that I hear from people. It's like, hey, I don't want to buy a precon, which totally respect that. I think precons are really great for that reason. You can buy a precon, you can make tweaks to it, and that kind of gives you, like, a little starting off point. But it's really fun to build decks from scratch. That's literally why I do mock deck techs, is, like, y'all like them, but, like, also, guys, I get to deck build and just play, and it's super fun for me. I love it. So what my thought process was, is like, okay, where should you start? You're figuring out what should you do. Picking a commander is the first stop shop, right? So my thought process is if you're just starting out, I think it would make sense to do a 1 or a 2 color commander deck. Obviously, you could do 3, 4, 5. You can do whatever you want. My thought was you're starting out mana base, figuring all that stuff out. I think it's easier to start with mono with a 1 or a 2 color deck because then you don't have to worry about that as much. For the sake of this purpose, I chose Atali Primal Storm. I'm on EDH rec right now. This will be listed in the down bar below. And what I really love about this, I love so many things about EDH rec, is it categorizes things for you. Like, we love a categorization. So what it does is it has them over here and you can click on them, but you can also just scroll through. I feel like sometimes it's like, oh, like, for new players, whatever. I'm an experienced deck builder and I use EDH rec. And what I also really like is it has this new card section. So if a set just drops, people will say, hey, you could put these cards in here. Now, obviously, you're not going to sit there and put every single one of these cards in here because they're going to give you way more than 100 cards. What I also like about EDH rec is it puts your price here. So it tells you, oh my gosh, Ulamog, he's an expensive little dude. Maybe we need something a little bit more affordable. Or, like, there will be times where I'm looking and I'm like, hey, I really need to look for lands for this. And then I'll just boom, go to lands. And then we just check out lands. You get what I'm saying? This is really cool. It also has the high synergy cards, really, like, high recommendations, top cards, creatures. I mean, obviously 50. You're probably not going to be running 50 creatures. I don't know. Maybe you're going to play Rurikthar. Rurikthar is really fun. Instant sorceries and all this sort of stuff, right? This is super great. So you're going to be getting thrown a lot of info. If you're conscientious about budget, these are really great things too, because, like I said, they have the price on them. But if you're like, hey, I don't mind spending a little bit of extra money, but here's the thing is you're going to be getting so many cards thrown at you. And also, that's not to say that you might already have some cards. So when I'm building a deck, what I will do is my first stop shop is I look through what cards I already own. And then I go to EDH rec and I say, okay, now we have the cards. And let's just say you're like, okay, this card. And I'm going to talk about, we'll talk about Magus of the Wheel. I really like this card. I actually have this in my Karlach build. Let's just say you're building a deck, this deck or a red deck, and you're like, I want to run this card. Okay, but, like, what do you do with it? I would say there's two options. The first option is a deck building website. I use Tapped Out. There's a bunch of different websites that you could use. Moxfield is another one. But basically what you can do is like, this is one of the mock decks texts that I've done for Omnath. And, you know, you do this, you can put all the cards on here. One thing that I will also like about them is that they have a maybe board. What I really like about this is, let's just say you're like, hey, I don't know if I want to run this card. Like, there's going to be cards that you know you want. You can kind of separate them out, which I really like. Another thing that I like about Tapped Out a lot is it talks about your curve. So we can see over here, oh, hey, we're hinting a lot at the 3-drops, which I mean is like fine, but then it also can show us like our higher curve. It's like, okay, we don't have like a ton of stuff in our higher curve, which is totally fine. So it breaks things down for you, it separates, and you're like, there will be like times Paul and I were deck building his Obeka deck, and we were trying to cut cards. And I was like, Paul, I was like looking and I was like, you just have so many enchantments. I was like, you just don't need like 15. Like, that's too many. So we ended up going through and we ended up balancing it out that way. It breaks it down for you so you get to kind of see like where are, you know, oh, okay, we have, you know, a solid amount of creatures. We have 23. Like, that's a good number, whatever, right? But like, you're able to kind of see those things that you wouldn't otherwise see. So another thing that I would say too that I really like about Tapped Out is you can look up other people's stuff. Similarly to kind of this, but let's just say you're like, hey, I want to check out other Atali decks. You can say, oh, I want to see what other people are running. And then you type Atali and you're like, go da-da-da, and you look at all the other decks. Because if you are looking at like 10 different Atali decks and everybody is running this one card, there's a really good chance that you should run that one card. The other thing that I will say about EDH that I really enjoy to do, this is a little sneak tip, is what I will do is, let's just say you're like, oh, I want to build mono red, but I don't want to build Atali, whatever, which Atali is really cool, by the way. But let's just say you're like, you know what, but I really want to run a different creature. I will look at the other legendary creatures, and sometimes I just like click on them, and I see this card's also really fun, by the way. I have this in Karlak. Super fun. I'll click on this. This did not work in the way that I thought it would, but it's okay. So basically, I found that I liked this card, and then what I then do is I take the name, and then I'll type in their name and then EDH rec, and I'll look at other cards because there's going to be a lot of similarities between, they're both mono red, but there's obviously going to be some differences, like things that are more better for this deck. And that's how I get exposed to like a lot of cards. And this might just be, if that's like going to be too overwhelming for you, so I was like tapping the screen. If that's overwhelming for you, don't do that. Take that advice with a grain of salt. But like, this is a really good starting off point to get yourself exposed to a lot of different Magic cards, and so that way you can do that. Okay, so now you have your 100 cards, or you have your tapped out list. You're going through, you're making your edits, you're figuring out what you want to do. The other thing too that I will say is like, there will be times, I have a feeling Paul and I are going to have this experience upcoming where he's going to be building, or he's going to be making tweaks to his Eldrazi deck. And he's going to just have so many cards. I was like, right, sometimes that can be really overwhelming. If you're like, hey, I have this 100, but I don't know how some of these cards are going to play out or whatever, throw them on that maybe board. Don't get rid of them. Do not get rid of them, because you might end up being like, hey, this one card just didn't work how I thought it was. And then you can go ahead and make tweaks. That's what I like to do. What I like to do is I have my Magic wish list. And so what I will do is I will put cards on here that I know. So for example, if I go to my Karlak builds, if I can see, my cat is walking it. There are cards on here that I don't even have. So if I'm like, wow, I don't like the way that this card performs, I'm like, oh, you know what card I don't have? I don't have Magus of the Moon. That's a card that I might want to buy. And so I keep cards on here that are like my kind of like backup options, just in case. And this is a really great idea to have extra cards in your pocket, because there is nothing worse than like drawing a hand and being like, I don't like this card. And then you're like stuck with it and you're like, well, this kind of sucks, and you don't want it. Okay, so now that we have the deck, we have the cards that we want, we're now going to look at the mana base. I would say for a lot of decks, I always really love the number 35 lands. Now, this depends. If you are building a deck where lands matter, you're playing a deck Like, for example, I have my AC commander deck, which is a lands matter deck. So my lands matter, and I want a lot of them. I run more lands in that deck than 35. I think 35 is a really, really great number. Now, it depends. If you're playing, really high CMC stuff or, things like that, I just think 35 is a great number. I've been using that model for years. So I would say 35 lands. Now, here's what I will say that some people I think get a little lost in sometimes is running all like the specialty lands. So to give you an example of a specialty land that we could be running in this Atali Primal Storm build is a card like Evolving Wilds. This card's not fancy or anything like that, but it's a specialty land. It's not a basic. I like having a mix of both specialty lands and having a mix of basic lands. And I feel this way for a lot of different reasons. I feel like if I'm in an instance where somebody goes to destroy my land and I need to get a basic, if I don't have any basics in my deck, well, I've just missed out on an opportunity. So I always really like to have that. Another thing that I always really like to have in my mana bases without fail is having 1, maybe 2 land destruction cards. I think some people get very wary when I say this, like they think that I'm playing like a land destruction deck. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about 1. My personal favorite one is Field of Ruin. The reason I like Field of Ruin so much is because I'm able to target somebody's lands and then everybody is able to get a basic. Now, normally I am not in the business of helping people, but sometimes if I were to be running something else, somebody might go and say, oh, I want to get that off the table. But the fact that Field of Ruin helps everybody, it's kind of a good option for you. Like I said, I only run 1, and a lot of these are very budget affordable, which is another bonus. Field of Ruin is very inexpensive, which is great. You can also get the foil for really inexpensive too. Okay, let's talk about mana rocks and mana ramp. Even if you have a lower CMC deck, so I'll give you an example. I have my 1 commander project that I just did a deck tech on, my Queen Alenal commander deck. My curve is pretty low in that deck. I still run mana rocks and mana ramp. So what do those things mean? So first off, a rock is an example of a card like Soul Ring. This is a card that you should definitely be picking up in your commander decks. It's also very inexpensive too. It's about like $1 or $2. So I definitely recommend picking up this card. This is a card that is a rock. It stays on the battlefield. Now, we also want to look at some of our mana ramp options. Now, I did do mono red for this build, so this was a little bit on the harder thing, but I wanted to give you an off-color example, and I will be doing that with a couple of these just to give you like examples of what I'm talking about. So a card that's like a mana ramp is an example of a card like Rampant Growth, for example. It's sorcery, it does its thing, and all that sort of stuff. I run this, and these numbers too, it's always really challenging. Like I gave you the number for lands. I can't be here and say, okay, you should run 5 or you should run 10. It really just depends on your curve. If you're going to be having a higher curve, you're probably going to want more of these. If you've got a lower curve, you might want to run fewer of these. So I feel like 10 feels like a good number. If I had to like pick a number, 8 to 10 feels like good, but it just depends on your build. It depends on what you're trying to do. Another really important piece and things that you're going to need in your commander deck are board wipes. Oh my goodness. I am the queen of board wipes. I love me a good board wipe. My favorite board wipe, and it's also a universal board wipe, which means you can run it in everything, is Perilous Vault. I love Perilous Vault for so many reasons. It is 9 mana total to do, but you know what? I do not care because we are playing Perilous Vault and then we are immediately sacrificing Perilous Vault to get rid of everything. Now, some people have the attachment of, oh my goodness, I do not want to get rid of my things. Listen, I understand that opinion. I need you to take a step back here and when you are activating this board wipe, it's because you are like about to die or somebody has the most outlandish board and your board in comparison is not as good to keep up with that board. That is when you board wipe. This is something that does, again, impact everybody, but you know what? Life does in fact go on. And it's universal. This is definitely another reason why I'm also talking about Perilous Vault. It's also my favorite. So now, bumping down, similar to board wipes, we have spot removal. So my thing about board wipes I would also say for that, I would run a couple. I like to have me some board wipes. I like to have it. I probably run like, if I had to give a number, I'd probably say I run like a minimum in 3, 2 to 3 in all my commander decks. It really depends. I have like 8 in Avacyn, but Avacyn's also like, you gotta play the board wipes. So, okay, let's talk about spot removal. So, here's the thing about spot removal that I think sometimes some people miss, is a lot of people, when they think about spot removal, they think about a card that gets rid of a creature. For example, Path to Exile. Path to Exile is a great Magic card. I love Path to Exile. I run this in every single one of my white decks. Great spot removal card. It's 1 mana, it's instant speed. You literally do not care that they get a basic. That is so inconsequential to your objective, okay? The thing that I think sometimes some people miss is the other side, which is also getting rid of artifacts or enchantments or planeswalkers or anything else. A lot of times about the creature removal rather than that. So giving you an example of one of my favorite cards in green, which is Fade into Antiquity. So we've got our Fade into Antiquity. We are exiling any of the artifacts or enchantments on the field. It's 3 mana. This is a great card. I run this in like all of my green decks, which is great. Also, if I run a card in multiple decks, you know I really like it. So I'm gonna want my spot removal. I'm gonna want to have both of those options. I want to get rid of creatures, but I also want to keep artifacts and enchantments removal on the table because I'm gonna want to be able to get rid of those things as well. Okay, here's another thing that I feel like is so incredibly important into commander decks is making sure that you have card draw options in your commander deck. To me, there's 2 different types of commander. There's 2 different types of card draw options. There are some options that are very much like they'll draw you maybe 1 to 2 cards. So like an example of this might be a card like Ponder. I love Ponder. I run this in like all of my blue decks. It's a great staple for me. Great card. Then I have more of the like explosive card draw cards that draw me a lot of cards at the same time. For example, a card like Rishkar's Expertise. One of my personal favorites. You also get to cast a free spell from this, 5 or less. It's a great card. I really enjoy this card a lot. I think it's important to have a mixture of both, if possible. I think that's really great because there will be instances where maybe you cast your Rish cards and then you have to discard a bunch of cards, which is kind of a bummer. That's also, we should have said this earlier, but Reliquary Tower is also a good friend of yours if you're going to be drawing a lot of cards. I run Reliquary Tower in like everything because I love to draw cards. Card advantage, it's one of the best things. If you're in mono red, your card draw looks a little bit on the unusual side because the thing with that is you're running cards that maybe you exile the top card of your library, but you have an opportunity to play that card. The one card that you might run is the card Light Up the Stage. You can cast it for its spectacle cost if an opponent lost life this turn, which feels really easy, but I honestly think paying 3 mana for this is very reasonable too. You get to exile the top 2 cards of your library, and until end of turn you may play those cards, which is really cool. The downside to this is if you don't play those, they stay in exile. It's pretty hard to get them back from exile, but this is just something to note that like that's the way that red does card draw, and that's kind of like the advantage of that. So I didn't put this on my list, but I just thought about this right now. Protecting your commander / protecting your other creatures. Now, other people are going to be playing board wipes. Other people are going to be playing ways to get rid of your creatures. So finding a way to protect your commander and your heavy hitter creatures that you want to stay around is very important. So my top 2 that I run in everything are, of course, the 2 staples, Lightning Greaves along with Swiftfoot Boots. Swiftfoot Boots, very, 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 very affordable card. You can get this card for like $1. Lightning Greaves, slightly more expensive. You can get this card for a couple bucks. Still very good staple. My new favorite is this card called Mithril Coat. Pretty expensive. This card's about 15 or so bucks, but really, really great because it attaches automatically to your commander if you have it, and it's indestructible, and your creature is indestructible, which is awesome. I would say, numbers-wise, I like to have, like, I would say 2 to 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 5, depending on my commander. Depends on how important my commander is and how much I want to protect my commander. So, for example, running like a Mithril Coat Navison doesn't make a whole lot of sense because everything's already got indestructible, and that's totally fine by me. But I would say that I really want to make sure that I'm protecting my commander and all those things. It also gives haste too, so that I can hit, which is really great. So I would definitely recommend those for building a commander deck. I also threw on here to be mindful of your curve. There's such an awful feeling of having really great cards in your hands, but not being able to cast them, or casting like one card a turn and being like, man, I really wish that I was able to cast more of these. And to me, I think that says two things. The first is maybe we need more mana acceleration. We need some more rocks. We need some more ramp. The second thing could be maybe your curve is too high. I was playing in limited. I know, strange. And I felt like my curve was really low. And then when I actually played the deck, it didn't play at all like that. And I think this is a point that I just thought of right now, but like sometimes certain things look really good on paper. Like you read a card and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so good. And then you play with it and it's not very good. And I'm just here to tell you, that's okay. It's okay to do things like that. I have this happen and I feel like I'm someone too, like I will say like, oh, I don't like this card, or I don't think this card is very good. And I feel like some people get really upset by that. Listen, if you get your panties in a twist because I say I don't like a Magic card, like there's bigger things in life, you know what I'm saying? But that happens. There are cards that you read and you say, oh my God, this looks like it would do everything, and you play with it. You have to play test the deck. You can do all of these things and check all your boxes, cross all your T's and dot all your I's. I had to think about that expression for a second. You can do all those things by the book, but until you actually play the deck and see it, I have instances that happen where I love the way one card performs in one deck and I don't run it in the other. It has nothing to do with the fact that I don't like it. And I say this a lot actually, where like when I take a card out or something, it's like, hey, I just want to be super clear. I like this card. I might have just found a better alternative, or I found something that has a cheaper CMC, or this is not fitting in the theme of the deck right now, or things like that. You need to play test the deck out and see how things are going to work. Now, in terms of how I tweak decks, because listen, I have decks that I have had for years that like, I am like, I don't want this card anymore. And here's basically what I do. If I am ever playing a game of Commander and I draw a Magic card and it gives me a like negative reaction where I'm like, I don't like this card, guess what? It's going out of the deck. I either do one of two things. I make a mental note. I really know that I shouldn't do this because truly like my brain is like a box of cats. Like I shouldn't do that. So what I like to do is I like to put on my wish list and I like to make a note, say, take out this card. So that way, when I am looking through and I say, oh, hey, I'm going to order cards. What should I get? What should I take out? That's a really important thing. Yeah. If you draw a Magic card and you are like, I don't like this, or you play with it and you're like, this is really underwhelming, take it out. One thing I will also see people do is if you, for example, if you're on a budget, you're starting out, you're like, hey, I want this card, but it's really expensive. I want to know, is this card worth it? Proxy it. Make yourself a little proxy. If you're like me, you're going to make yourself a little like piece of paper that just has like the name of the card, and then you're not going to remember it and you're going to have to look it up. Or you could be smart like Paul and like actually print proxies on the computer that are like nice, that are like the actual card with the CMC and all that bells and whistles or whatever. Yeah, those are the difference in our proxies. But really, especially if you're spending a lot of money, and like we said, sometimes cards look really good. There's expensive cards that I've bought that I have been underwhelmed by. That's an awful feeling. And then you're like, I'm stuck with this card that I don't really like. Don't give into peer pressure. Don't give into it, you know? And I think the other piece as well, because we've been talking a little bit about money in this video, is you can build a good Commander deck. That is not very expensive. I had this conversation with somebody who I don't play Magic with anymore, and one of the reasons why I don't play Magic with them anymore is because of their take on this, which is, well, when I build a deck, I have to spend $800 on it. You do not. As somebody who, I love Magic cards, I love foil Magic cards, I spend a decent amount of money on Magic cards. I have built decks before. I have built budget decks. I have a lot of my decks can, aside from maybe a couple of cards, and we're discounting the foils here, you can build a really solid Commander project for $50, $100. So don't let anybody bully you, and don't let anybody into telling you, well, you have to do this and this is and this and this. Yeah, you're not going to be better if you do those things. I mean, yeah, obviously like that's a given, but like there's definitely things that you can do and ways that you can make your decks better. I have budget card videos. I do budget deck decks on these things. If budget is a concern for you, yeah, do not let anyone do that. And listen, if you are in a play group where people are giving you a hard time about cards and budget, don't play Magic with those people. If you have like a negative reaction to people you play with, just don't play Magic with them anymore. And I know that sounds like really simple, but it actually is that simple. We're adults here, or we're, you know, people who play Magic or whatever. Life is truly too short, like, to be playing with people that, you know, you just don't enjoy and that are just going to be negative Nancy's. There is no room for that. Definitely no room for that here, but definitely just no room for that anywhere. So, y'all, I think that is everything for all of these deck building tips that I have taken and just combined into this one list. Like I said, if I do have other ideas, they will be featured in another part. I don't know if that's going to happen, but if it does, I mean, who knows? There's stranger things have happened. So anyways, if you guys like this video and you found it helpful, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you're not already, and I'll catch you on my next one.